Welcome back, everybody, to Magic with Randy. I am Randy, and today we're breaking down standard for the last time. This coming up weekend here on the 22nd will be the last time we can qualify for the RC for standard coming up in May. So, as always, guys, let's get into it and kind of figure out what you can take to take down that last RCQ. Alright, starting off, we have the first standard challenge on this last Friday. We had 6 mono red decks, 6 Esper bounce decks, 4 Golgari mid range, 4 Gruul aggro, 2 Dimir bounce, and then a bunch of 1-ofs. So as you can see, once again, aggro still seems to be the most popular deck being played around with 6 mono red, 4 Gruul aggro. Not too surprising about that at all. As I've been saying, probably for the last 6 or 7 of these, if you want to take down one of your RCQs, I think that aggro is probably the best way to go. Mono red's been seeing a insurgence lately, or a surge lately. I still think Gruul is also a very good possibility, but I mean those are pretty much the 2 decks that you probably want to take realistically. Outside of that, I think Esper Bounce is another solid option. And then obviously you can take whatever deck you want. We've seen decks win all the time that are not aggro or Esper Bounce or anything like that. So I mean, take what you feel most comfortable with. But I think if you're just trying to spike one of the last RCQs here in the season, those are probably your best 2 choices, which isn't too surprising. They're just a super efficient decks. They're super fast, and they punish you for making mistakes. Basically, they punish you for misstepping. They punish you for not curving out perfectly. They punish you for not hitting your land drops or anything of that nature. They capitalize on it and can seize the moment very easily and end the game very quickly. So it's not too surprising we're seeing, mono red, Gruul aggro, Esper bounce be these, top 2 decks, top 3 decks essentially. And then for some reason Golgari mid range is up there. Do not play that if you want to win. I stand by that statement forever. Basically until meta changes drastically, do not play Golgari if you're trying to win. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of the same old we've been seeing. It's not too surprising to see, again, aggro just being super popular, super powerful. It is probably one of the best things you can do, and I think going into the RC even, we're going to see, mono red, Gruul aggro be one of the top 1, top 2 decks, I think, moving forward. Barring something crazy coming out of the cons deck, or the dragons of Cartier set that's coming out here in April. I think barring anything crazy coming out from that set, aggro is not going to get worse by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably only going to get better, realistically. So I think outside of that, it's just those are kind of what are the 2 decks you want to be, barring something crazy coming out of the new set here in April. As always, guys, real quick, if you like what I'm doing, you like what you're seeing, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, let me know if you were able to qualify for the RC coming up in May, which one you're going to. I'd love to hear from you guys. To no surprise, though, mono red did win this one as well, and you can kind of see why. It's just efficient removal, efficient damage spells. Honestly, the biggest surprise in this build is that they're playing 3 Sunspine Links in the main. That is something we haven't seen a whole lot of. Only 2 Soulful Sanctuaries as well. Usually we see 3 of them, but I think that's the biggest surprise with this deck is that we see Sunspine Links in the main deck, essentially. Seeing 3 of them. Outside of that, though, we're playing the whole mouse package with, Hero, Challenger, Manifold. We have Higher Claw because card's great. We have Swift Sphere because another great 1-drop. And then, of course, Screaming Nemesis, so no surprise there. First Lightning, along with 2 Lightning Strikes and 2 Witchstalker Frenzies for removal / can be face damage with a caveat on Witchstalker. You need Nemesis in play to make it a burn spell, but and then, of course, Monstrous Ray is probably one of the best 1-drops in these red decks. And then the sideboard's nothing too crazy. Pyroclasm's kind of interesting. We're seeing that kind of come back as a way to break the mirrors, essentially. Torch Tower, obviously, for the mirror deck, for the mirror match, not mirror deck, mirror match. Lithium Anthony Barrage, not too surprising, be able to kill white and blue creatures. Really good against, against Esper Bounce. Good against the Oculus decks running around. Good against the Domain deck running around. Being able to kill Zer on the spot, no questions asked, is amazing. So yeah, I mean, honestly, sideboard looks pretty stock as a whole. Only difference is, I think Herb Restless Forge is probably a card that can be cut. At this point, I don't think that card is actually that good anymore in Standard, so I wouldn't be surprised to see that get cut more and more as the days go by. But outside of that, there's a very stock list essentially. With stuff, Sunshine Linux in the main deck is a little different, but I think it's probably the right call with Domain being so popular. Obviously, there was no Domain in this matchup, but Linux is just a good card all around. When you only have a maximum of 6 damage you can take from it. Everyone else is running a lot less basics than you are. So just being able to do a lot of damage to someone out of nowhere and preventing life gain is always just a great little caveat as well on the card. So not too surprising. Like I said, I think it's probably one of the best decks to take if you're looking to just spike a RCQ in this last weekend. Going on to the first challenge on Saturday, though, we had 6 Esper Bounce, 6 Mono Red, again, 3 Domain Midrange, and then 3 Esper Omniscience decks, the combo decks, 2 Golgari Midrange, 2 Gruul Aggros, and then a bunch of 1-ofs, including 2 more Omni decks. Not too surprising, the Omni deck has really picked up a lot of traction. I know at the Nerd Rage Gaming, their last big event they had for Standard, it did end up taking down the whole tournament. One of the Omni decks. So not too surprising to see it kind of get an uptick here. I don't think the deck is particularly terrible. I think that it has a good enough game plan against the red decks that it can buy enough time. I saw it happen on camera a couple different times in that event, so not too surprising there. I will say though, I think that the Omni deck is a little bit weirder in how it's set up as a whole. I do think that if you're gonna end up playing against a lot of counter spells and control, I think it becomes a lot worse. So I think it's gonna be this weird area where we sit in where as long as Mono Red's doing super well or red aggressive decks are doing super well, I think that deck will always have a place. It gets to really beat up on Domain. Domain doesn't really have any answers to it. Well, it does in the sense that it has Leyline Binding, but that's about it. So if they don't have Leyline Binding, you're just gonna be free rolling them all day. So I think there is some give and take there in this metagame, but yeah, Omni Combo definitely has kind of surged lately, and I'm not sure if it's actually here to stay or if it's just people saw it won a tournament, so now everyone wants to try it out and see how good the deck actually is. As far as all these Esper, 4-color, blue white, the whole deck is basically blue white, and the sideboard cards are what makes it the other colors, and you're really only getting that when you're comboing off. So realistically, they're all blue white, all blue white Omni Combo, but they have different cards in the sideboard that make them different colors by definition. So just a heads up on that. If you're see all these different color types, that's why. But yeah, once again, Esper Bounce aggro doing its thing, being well positioned. That being said, though, it was the Esper Bounce deck that did win. This one going back to the more traditional aggressive build with playing Optimistic Scavenger in the main deck. A lot of these decks have kind of cut that for a more mid-rangey plan on it. This one kind of opted for best of both worlds. Still playing the 3 stock ups. Not too surprising there, but you're playing the 4 Pixies, 4 Feeders, 3 Optimistic Scavengers, and then we also have 4 Hopeless Nightmare, 4 Storm Chasers Challenge, 4 Nowhere Runs, 2 Monumentum Breakers. This town ain't big enough, and then only 1 Go for the Throat, one Destroy Evil, 3 stock ups, 2 Kaidos, kind of a little different. Usually we're seeing 3 Kaidos, so they definitely trimmed some numbers here and there just to be able to get in those 3 stock ups, which makes sense. I think stock up is a very powerful card moving into this meta. Just being able to look at the top 5, get 2 cards, essentially a mini Fact or Fiction where your opponent doesn't know any of the information is always good. And then the sideboard's not anything too surprising, really. Kind of what we've been seeing. They got Graveyard Hate with Ghost Vacuum. We got Duress and Dreams of Steel and Oil. For when we need to do Hand Disruption. Grim Bauble for additional removal against the red aggressive decks. Destroy Evil for additional removal against decks that are going bigger than us. Pest Control for the mirror matches. Anoint with Affliction. Jesus. Reading card today. There for the mid-range aggro matchups, essentially. Just all these cards kind of make sense. Deck is not necessarily stocked by any means because we keep running into do we play stock up? Do we not play stock up? What do we cut for stock up? Is Optimistic Scavenger bad? All these little kind of questions that keep coming up over and over again. So, be interesting to see as a whole how Esper Bounce continues to grow and evolve essentially, but it's definitely here to stay. And like I said, barring anything coming out of the new set in April, this deck is not going anywhere. Same thing with the red aggressive decks. Moving on to the second challenge, though, on Saturday, here we had 5 Dimir mid-range decks, 6 Dimir mid-range decks, 5 domain decks. First time we've seen domain this whole weekend. Kind of surprising that domain just kind of fell off the face of the earth. Definitely a super powerful deck. Definitely a deck that's proven itself over and over again, but did not put up any numbers really this weekend. 4 Esper Bounce, 3 Mono Red, 2 of those Esper Omni decks again, 2 Azorius Control, 2 Golgari mid-range because people like to waste their ticks. 2 Gruul aggro decks, 2 Rakdos aggro decks, which is really, it's like a mono red deck that is playing the Leyline, and then using the Sellsword as kind of like the Black Splash with dresses in the sideboard. Kind of an interesting take. Nothing too special about it, just a different version of what we were already playing for the aggro decks, basically. And then a couple different one-ups. Not too, kind of surprising to see Dimir midrange coming back into the game. I do think it might have an uptick because of all the Omni decks running around. It does kind of have a good matchup in that sense where you get to play a bunch of counter spells against the deck that's trying to do one thing and do one thing very well. Makes sense that when counters magic's going to interrupt them, that seems like a good place to be. Plus you have, a clock as well where you're able to play a lot of things at instant speed. So they constantly have to, hold up mana, play around what you're doing, and then if they just don't do anything, like, all right, cool, end of turn, I'm going to, flash in a couple creatures, and I'm going to keep beating you down slowly as I accrue card advantage. So it makes sense why Dimir midrange would kind of pick up in that sense. Domain, I'm not sure why it dropped off for the first couple challenges and then came back. I think the deck's super well positioned. I think it's annoying to play against. I think it can be beaten. I've seen it get beaten before. It's not like the deck is just an auto win against the format by any means. Obviously, if it was, we see way more domain than we do. But it is one of those decks is, I think well positioned as a whole, and kind of just depends on the skill level of both players when you're playing against it. I mean, sometimes domain just does dumb stuff where it curves out perfectly and it really didn't matter what you did. But when you get those actual games where you have to think about what's going on, it is a lot more skill intensive than people realize to play against and play. That being said, though, Dimir midrange did take down this tournament. Nothing too surprising here. Honestly, I think the craziest part about Dimir midrange anymore is the fact that they're down to 2. Like, this deck is down to 2 Fairy Masterminds. I remember when we started the RCQ season, I was like, yeah. We know how Dimir's getting built. We're playing 4 Glass Sirens. We're playing 4 Fairy Masterminds. Those are given all the time. And now we're down to 2 Fairy Masterminds. So it's kind of crazy to see, the iterations of the deck as a whole. And then this one even going a little bit bigger where we have a Shieldred in the main. We have a Gix command in the main. We got, Phantom Interference as our counter spells. Kind of help us out along with Thassa's Tidebinder. So, just good little things there. And then, in the sideboard here we got a Spell Pierce and a Negate as well for our removal. For our counter spells, we're playing some Duresses, some more Thassa's Tidebinders. So honestly, the deck just looks solid as a whole. That being said, though, I still don't really like this deck versus like the Pixie decks or the Bounce decks, and I think that the aggro decks can still beat it pretty well. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's cool to see Dimir midrange never die. Essentially, just gets played in smaller numbers sometimes, but it's still doing well. I think Shieldred's still one of the Shieldred's in like the weirdest spot right now in Standard, where it's still super good and super efficient, but it's a 4 mana, doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield now. And like that used to be like, how would you play this card? It was like, well, it's still wins on its own, but now with all this town ain't big enough and things like that, bouncing, like playing 4 mana to do nothing can just be game ending essentially. So it's one of those weird spots where like the card's really good, but it's also really bad. So it's just like you gotta pick and choose where you want this card essentially. Then going on to the Sunday challenge here, we had 5 Esper Bounce, 4 Esper Omni decks, 4 Mono Red, 3 Dimir midrange, 2 Boros aggro, 2 Golgari aggro, 2 Caretaker's Talent, 2 Rakdos aggro, 2 Gruul aggro, and a bunch of little 1-0s, including a Goblins deck, which is kind of cool to see. Goblins still seeing play. But yeah, I mean, this makes sense. We're still seeing Esper Omni putting up numbers for some reason. I'm not sure how good that deck really is. Realistically, we'll just have to see moving forward if it's going to actually make a big splash at the RC, or if it's just going to be dead in the water with it being open deck lists and things of that nature. Same thing we'll have to see if, the aggro decks do suffer from the open deck list concept where, oh, I know I'm playing against aggressive deck. I'm going to mulligan into where I have removal spells or I have a good game plan early on type situation. So it'll be interesting to see what happens at the RC because of that. I always think that, essentially aggressive and combo decks do kind of suffer in open deck list meta where, yeah, you're playing against aggressive, but even with these red decks though, also where it's like, yeah, I know I'm playing against, an aggressive deck, but I mulligan into a decent hand and it still just didn't matter. They still ran me over. I've definitely seen that where, we'll see people was like, yeah, I had an amazing opening hand and then didn't matter. Just didn't matter. So we'll see how that ends up going, but surprisingly, Dimir midrange won yet again. Kind of almost a photocopy of what we just saw from the last first place. This one has another Shieldred in the sideboard though, so a little bit different there. Only one Ghost Vacuum, things like that. It's a little bit differences in the sideboard. Main deck is relatively the same. That being said though, I think that if you're trying to win one of these last chance RCQs before the season ends, I think you should be looking at playing, mono red, Gruul aggro. Esper Bounce, those would be the top 3 decks. I know everyone's kind of game planned and prepared for them, but there's a reason why the decks are still number 1. People have been gunning for Esper Bounce for a while now, and that deck refuses to die or go down. Same thing with Gruul and Mono Red. People have been game planning and having a sideboard plan for that since the beginning of the season, and it's still just putting up numbers consistently. It's still doing super well. So if you're trying to crush one of these last RCQs this weekend, I would definitely take one of those 2 decks. Or sorry, one of those 3 decks, I guess, technically. Play red aggressive deck, play Esper. Those are where I would put yourself at just to make sure you qualify. As always, guys, I am Randy. This is Magic with Randy. If you like what you're seeing, like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you qualified for the RC and which one you're going for or going to. Love to hear from you guys. I'll catch you guys next time.